Let me ask you a question. How long do you think it takes to build your dream physique naturally? Is it 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? Regardless of what you wish the answer is, this process will likely still take you a couple years. However, we can speed up the process at which you achieve it. This video will share with you a method of thinking or way of approaching training and nutrition which helped me build approximately 40 pounds of muscle in 2 years. Now, it is not an easy process, it will require you to focus, so if your main priority in life is not the gym, it's likely not the approach for you. This requires dedication, singular focus, and saying fuck off to a balanced lifestyle. Balance will not work, so if you still want to eat out, party, and essentially be an idiot, this video is not for you. Now, if you're willing to focus and dedicate most of your free time, energy, and attention to your goal, stick with me for the next 30 minutes because I'll teach you everything you need to know to speed up the process as much as possible. Only once you give yourself permission to stop trying to do it all, to stop saying yes to everyone, can you make your highest contribution towards the things that really matter. We live in a society that has a deep issue with prioritizing the essential over the trivial. We spread our attention and time into way too many different directions. We accept invitations of people we don't really care about because we feel the need to fit in. We accept to do things in our days that simply don't matter without really thinking about their importance. We take on more and more trivial projects that don't help us in any regard because we feel the need to stay busy and keep doing things. We have a major problem with the words yes and no. We say yes to many more things than we should and say no to way too few things. Something you have to understand, if you care about crafting your ideal physique in the least amount of time, is that you will need to learn to put a priority on the vital few over the trivial many. You will have to learn to eliminate what doesn't matter and focus your attention on the things that do. This is something we call essentialism, an idea or way of thinking where a person defines a few things that really matter to the achievement of their goal and then does those things with singular focus to achieve that goal as quickly as possible. If you care about crafting your ideal physique as quickly as possible, you will have to make a conscious sacrifice. A sacrifice of removing the things in your life that don't matter. A sacrifice of saying no to events, people, and things that don't move you forward. You will need to focus on one thing, and anything that doesn't help you achieve that thing gets eliminated, removed, or ignored. See, that is how progress works. It increases exponentially the more attention you put on it. If your goal is crafting your ideal physique and you direct 10% of your attention on that goal every day, you might make 5% of the progress you can make. If you put 20% of your attention, you might make 15% of the progress you could make. But if you keep directing more and more of your attention on your pursuit of crafting your ideal physique, the amount of progress you'll make in that goal will exponentially increase. This is also why people trying to achieve 10 things at the same time only make marginal progress in each. They scatter their attention in 10 different directions and wonder why they can't seem to grow anything. See, I want you to imagine two versions of you. The first puts minimal effort into his goal of crafting his ideal physique. He doesn't spend much time in the gym, and when he does, he'll focus on the wrong things and do everything that doesn't really move him forward. He still goes out to parties because the social pressure gets to him, his diet is not on point, and he still eats fast food quite frequently. This version of you has essentially not mastered the art of saying no. The second version of you puts in 90% of his attention into his goal of crafting the ideal physique. He goes to the gym 6 days a week for 1 hour each time, and his training is purely based on helping him build muscle. He removed everything that didn't contribute to helping him achieve his goal, and especially the things that reduced his ability to make progress. His diet is picture perfect, and he never cheats on his diet. He spends about 2 hours a day learning about training, nutrition, and how to stay consistent with these things over time. Every day, he's absorbing as much knowledge as he possibly can to make his progress even more exponential. This version of you has mastered the art of saying no to the things that don't contribute to the achievement of his goal. If you imagine those two versions of you, there is going to be a world of difference in the progress that they make towards that goal, and the only main difference between both is their ability to define the things that matter and saying no to everything else that doesn't, and this is really what this is about. If you want to make the quickest progress possible, you will need to learn to define what matters to the achievement of your goal and say no to almost everything else. And if you don't believe me, this way of thinking is something you'll be able to recognize in highly successful people in all walks of life. Almost every major company focused on solving one problem for one market before expanding. If you look at bodybuilders whose job it is to craft the best physique possible, they'll only focus on building muscle and losing fat. Most of the time, they're not partying, eating junk food, and even within the realm of training, they're just focused on crafting the best physique possible. They're not trying to maximize their cardiovascular health, they're not trying to learn to do a planche or front lever, they're just trying to build muscle. So the point I'm trying to make is that if you really want to make substantial progress in the way your physique looks, you will need to define exactly what you want, then define the variables that truly matter in the achievement of your goal, then defining all the things that don't matter and learning how to say no to them, and finally knowing how to maximize the variables that do matter for maximum progress. This video will teach you all of these things. Now, I want you to think about the objective because before we can define the variables that will help us achieve a goal, we need to know what that goal exactly is. So for you, what is the objective? Is it just about building muscle? Is it just about losing fat? Is it a combination between both? Depending on what the end goal is, doing certain things will matter more than others. If your goal is just about building muscle and gaining weight, cardio will matter less than if your goal is fat loss. So simply define the objective. This can be a certain weight, body fat percentage, or any number we can easily track. This will be your end goal to achieve. Now you might already have a number in mind. Perfect. If you don't, just think about it for a moment. What is it you want to achieve? Where would you like to get to? What weight or body fat percentage would you want to attain? Once you have that number, we can start to logically think about which behaviors will help us achieve our goal and which won't. So this step is a vital step in our journey. It's about finding what matters, what truly moves the needle in the amount of progress we make. It's our 20% that brings 80% of the results we make. The vital few things that help us achieve our goal at an exponential rate if we only focus on these. When it comes to crafting our ideal physique, it's not that difficult to define what matters. Assuming your goal is changing your body composition, there will be 4 vital things to do: weightlifting, dieting, recovery, and learning. If you think about it, we can really boil down a good body transformation to these 4 things. You can certainly maximize your hormones as well, but this will usually be done through lifestyle and nutrition anyway, if you do it in a way that I'll teach you later in the video. Now we can take this a step further. These represent the broad categories of things we should be focused on, but what will often then happen is that people will start to be focused on the trivial within those categories. For example, they'll focus on adding in fancy, often less safe, and most importantly less effective exercises instead of honing in on the fundamental basics. They'll focus on adding in many minor things to their diet instead of removing everything that doesn't matter and focusing on the vital few things that truly matter. What we have to learn to do is reason from first principles, and let me tell you what that means. In the world, you will have 2 types of people: ones who reason from analogy and ones who reason from first principles. Reasoning from analogy is essentially when you use your own narratives and subjective conclusions to reason. For example, if someone told me, "Adrien, meat and eggs are terrible for your health," I could ask them why, and they would answer me, "Because the news told me," or "Because my uncle told me." Someone reasoning from analogy will not be able to back their arguments with soundproof logic. Reasoning from first principles, on the other hand, is essentially when you use logic and core sound truth to reason. It is something that cannot be further questioned. It is a pure fact about reality. For example, if someone told me, "Adrien, creatine will help you build muscle," I could ask them why, and they would respond, "Because we have a century of evidence backing up its effectiveness, and not often will you have cases in which it hasn't shown a benefit in terms of muscle mass or strength increase." Someone reasoning from first principles will always try to back up their claims with evidence. Now, I'm not suggesting science is always right, but in general, if there's enough evidence backing up a certain claim, we can assume it to be factually true. See, the way it works is that you'll have 2 types of realities. We have an objective reality and a subjective reality. The objective reality is what is actually true. It's what we can actually rely on to be factual and evidence-backed. The subjective reality, on the other hand, is what we believe to be true. It is our own subjective view of the world. And so we all have a subjective view of the world and how we believe it to be true, but what people who reason from first principles will do is ignore their own subjective biases and try to overlap their subjective reality with the objective reality of the world as much as possible and create what we call a subjective overlap. So essentially what I'm trying to get to is that in order to find vital few things in our training and nutrition, we need to reason from first principles and try to overlap as much of our subjective experiences with the objective nature of the world. So let me give you an example. If we're trying to maximize our muscle mass, we can look at the individual components of what builds muscle in the first place. In this case, the components that stimulate muscle growth are protein, water, energy, and a stimulus. Now, you could also argue that you'll need recovery as well, but for the most part, we can boil down muscle growth to these 4 components. What we can then do is look for a way to implement these variables as best as we can in our training and nutrition. In our training, we'll look for the movements that create a very strong stimulus on the muscle we're trying to build. That's the moment you usually realize that the fundamental basic movements give us the strongest stimulus and thus grow our muscles the most. If you're not sure which movements create the strongest stimulus or our basic fundamental movements, you can always watch a Jeff Newport video or something. Now in our diet, we'll look at the foods that optimize our caloric and protein intake because these are the fundamental components of muscle building. Sure, micronutrients, meal timing, and a couple other things like this still matter, but at a fundamental level, we can boil down nutrition for muscle building to caloric and protein intake. Another example would be general weight loss or weight gain. We have the first law of thermodynamics, which states that energy cannot be created or destroyed, it can only be converted from one form to another. Essentially what this means is that in order for your body to gain weight, it has to be in an energy or caloric surplus, and for your body to lose weight, it has to be in an energy or caloric deficit. What you'll then do with the rest of your diet and training will determine if that weight loss is fat, water, muscle, or anything else. But at a fundamental level, how you lose weight or gain weight depends on your caloric balance, and we know this to be factually true. This is the first principle of weight change. It is something that cannot be further questioned. So the point I'm trying to make is that for you to be actually right about what is vital and what is trivial, you want to think about the fundamental components of what you're trying to build and do these over and over again until you've achieved your goal. In the case of maximizing muscle growth, if you do this correctly, you'll see that you'll always come back to the basic compound and isolation movements. Fancy looking exercises simply don't create a strong enough stimulus for your muscles to grow. In the case of maximizing your diet, you'll see that caloric and protein intake will matter most, and anything else gets less and less important. So that is how you find the vital few. This section will walk you through a framework I believe to be quite effective at helping you determine if something is trivial or not. This section is about finding the things that don't help us much, the things that are not that important, and the things that barely move the needle. Then it's about removing those and realizing how little they actually mattered. What you will realize when you do this is that the majority of things you do on a daily basis are absolutely trivial and useless at helping you achieve the things you're trying to achieve. So how do we actually find and remove the things that don't matter? The first method will simply be to reason from first principles. Going through this method of thinking should already help you remove a lot of trivial and useless things in your life. However, to make sure we're actually removing everything we need, or make sure the things we're removing are actually worth removing, you can ask yourself a couple questions. First, does this thing really matter? It's a very simple one, but when you actually ask yourself this, you might find that you're doing many more trivial things than you previously thought. Oftentimes, we don't realize how many useless things we do until we actually ask ourselves the question: do the things I'm currently doing to build my physique actually matter? Do these exercises actually give me the best results? Are these exercises actually worth my time? Does this shake that I'm spending 10 minutes making every day actually help me in any way? Once you ask yourself whether something is actually useful, you might just realize that it's not. The second question is, would my progress take a major hit if I didn't do X? If you stop doing a certain thing, a certain behavior, would it really impact your progress a lot, or would it barely change anything? If you're doing 3 sets of failure on the incline bench press and you stop doing it, your progress would absolutely take a major hit. On the other hand, if you're doing a 10-minute ab workout that actually takes more like 20 minutes total at the end of every session and you stop doing it, the progress you'll make will be just fine. And finally, the third question you can ask yourself is, what is the trade-off of doing X? Every time we do something, there's something else we can't do. So the question you can ask yourself is, if I do this thing, would there be something else that I could do that is more valuable to the achievement of my goal? Could I do something else instead? With that last question, you will often be able to find other things you're doing that don't really matter. Now, once you've answered all these questions, you can either make a list of these things or just keep these questions in mind and adapt your behavior as you're going through your day. Once we've defined the vital few and find a framework to define the trivial many, the last thing we can do is make sure we get the most out of the few vital things. We can maximize each variable to make sure we're making as much progress as we possibly can in the least amount of time. So the first question I'd like to answer is, how do we maximize our training so we can maximize our muscle growth? In those 2 years where I built approximately 40 pounds of muscle, I did a lot of things right and a lot of things wrong, so this section will give you my most valuable lessons you can adopt. Number 1, technique is king. Firstly, my focus has always been on keeping very good technique with lighter weights and then increasing the weight over time. This is very important to remember, mainly for 2 reasons. First is because if you disregard your form and increase the weight regardless, because you have a bad form, your chances of getting injured will increase by a lot. Second, if you don't have the proper technique, you'll simply not grow as much as you could. You actually need to target the muscle properly to grow it optimally, and with bad technique, you're simply not hitting the muscle as best as you can. Let's say you have 2 people doing a bench press. One is pushing the weight up and down, not contracting and feeling the muscle properly, doesn't have a stable stand, and just cares about the weight moving. The other is contracting and feeling the muscle on every repetition, goes slowly on the eccentric, puts the muscle in the deep stretch while controlling everything, and feels the muscle burn and tear apart on every repetition. Who do you think is going to build more muscle, and who do you think is more likely to get injured? Technique is king. Make sure you first focus on getting the technique right, then you can start to increase the weight over time. Number 2, train to failure and passed it. The second method I used was training to failure and passed it on every single working set I did. Imagine a SAM select level intensity. This is something that is often looked down upon in the science-based community, and although I love learning from science and looking for the most optimal way to train, this is something that I have to disagree with. The limits that science-based lifters gave me were not actually my own limits. I always went to complete failure and passed it with partial reps, drop sets, and so on, because it personally felt better to me and I made more progress doing that. For example, if you saw a set from me today, I still apply this. I'll do drop sets, myo reps, partial reps, and so on. Now, this is something you will need to experiment with yourself. Going very intensely on every set is something that worked for me but might not work for you. If after every workout it takes you a week to recover, you'll probably need to go slightly less intense, but from what I've seen, a lot of people can actually train harder than what is recommended by the science-based community. So become your own experiment, don't be afraid to go past imaginary limits and see what works for you. The third idea, which combines my previous point, is that I combined high volume with high intensity. Now that is again where you'll need to run your own experiment. This is something that worked for me but might not work for you. Usually there's a bit of a trade-off that needs to be made, which is that as your intensity increases, your volume has to decrease, and as your volume increases, your intensity has to decrease to not overtrain. For me personally, it seemed like I could pull off high intensity and high volume because I got a higher volume tolerance, but that might not be the case for you, so do your own experiment and see what works for you. The last thing I could think of was the fact that I never skipped pre-workout cardio as a warm-up. This is not a full-blown 30-minute cardio session, but simply a means to get your heart rate up and get some blood flowing through your muscles. Just this 5-minute cardio session on a bike or treadmill allowed me to 1. Get in the mood of training if I happen not to be, 2nd, it made my body ready and hyped for the workout, and 3rd, it reduced my risk of injury. So that small amount of cardio before a workout is always a no-brainer to me. Number 5, focus on fundamental movements. Previously, when we've defined the vital few things that mattered and covered the idea of first principle reasoning, I mentioned that creating a stimulus for muscle growth was best done with basic fundamental movements. Whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or advanced lifter, fundamental movements will always be the cornerstone of your training because they're the most safe and effective movements. Try your best to ignore fancy-looking yet ineffective exercises. Stick with the fundamentals. Bench press for chest, lat pull-down or pull-ups for back, barbell bicep curls for biceps, shoulder press for shoulders, and so on. You can never really go wrong with these movements, and by that I just mean that they've been proven to be effective over and over again. Last thing I'll say is that the split I ran during that time was a 6-day per week push-pull leg variation. On Monday I had legs, on Tuesday I did back and shoulders, on Wednesday I did chest and arms, Thursday was legs again, Friday was rest, Saturday was back and shoulders, and Sunday was chest and arms. If you care about copying this, go ahead. The second big aspect of this is what you eat and how much you eat. We all understand that if you're training very intensely, you will need more food to give your body what it needs to build muscle and repair itself. Again, I'm going to give you my most valuable lessons. The first is eating enough. This is actually a mistake that I made in my first year, which is the fact that I simply didn't eat enough. The main goal I had at the start was to get a six-pack, which I believe to be a goal many people have. The issue is that by having that goal, I also reduced my food intake by a lot, which means I just became smaller overall. I wasn't giving my system the amount of food it needed, so I wasn't able to grow. The second and third year, however, I overcame what essentially turned into an eating disorder and began to eat more again. That is the point where I actually started to grow properly. I really believe that eating enough is one of the most important aspects besides training, because if you don't, you will simply not give your body what it needs to grow and repair itself. Don't make the mistake I did and eat enough food. Now, if you're fat, this doesn't apply to you because you already have enough energy reserves and you just need to make sure you eat enough protein. That's it. The second thing I did was mostly focus on eating real foods. The fitness industry might tell you that eating 80% clean, 20% bad is a better approach, but I was obsessed. I only wanted to have the best food in my body to make the most amount of gains possible. Some of you might argue that you can't get enough calories in if you just eat real foods and don't allow yourself empty calories, but if you logically think about it, there's plenty of foods with high calories and that are still healthy. Nuts, high-fat meats, butter, peanut butter, and so on. Focus on real foods, you'll make much higher quality gains with those. The third thing I would highly suggest you be careful of is not falling into the dirty bulk trap. This is something that I tend to fall in every single time, which is I'll start a clean bulking phase, which then turns into a dirty bulking phase because of the dopamine I crave. The dirty bulk trap is essentially when you start a bulking phase, the first months are fine, you slowly increase your weight over time and everything goes as it should. Now at some point you will start to stagnate and you will start to crave the dopamine from seeing your weight increase. Therefore, to keep seeing the weight increase on the scale, you will start to allow yourself to eat more junk food just to get more calories in. Then that small amount of junk food turns into more junk food, and before you know it, you're dirty bulking, eating everything you come across and neglecting your health completely. This is what I call the dirty bulk trap. When you start a clean bulk, then get addicted to your weight going up, and then get trapped into a dirty bulk to see your weight keep going up. Make sure you always stick to the plan because you will end up fat with high blood pressure if you're not careful. Now the third important aspect is our recovery. Here again, I'll share with you my most valuable lessons. Number one is to simply get to bed and wake up at the same time. It's a really simple and basic principle, but one we too often forget. Many of us disrupt our natural sleep cycle by going to bed and waking up at different times, but you have to understand that your ability to recover isn't only based on you sleeping enough, but also about you sleeping between the same times each night. For about 2 years, I went to bed at 9 p.m. each night and woke up at 6 a.m. each morning, no exceptions, and this really helped me recover properly each night. So although it's a very basic thing, it's important to keep this in mind. If you have any struggles with this, I suggest you keep an alarm for when you should go to bed. Instead of having an alarm for when you should wake up, keep it for when you should go to bed and fall asleep. If you do it this way, the time you wake up at will be taken care of by itself over time. The second thing is to dedicate more time to sleep. It's very common for people to underestimate how much time they actually need to sleep or assume the moment they get in bed is the time they start to sleep. Way too often do we believe we're getting enough sleep when in reality we're chronically sleep deprived. This idea is especially important if you're training very intensely and eating lots of food. Your body just needs more recovery than usual and you really can't afford to neglect this. My suggestion is to simply go to bed 1 hour earlier or wake up 1 hour later depending on what suits you the best and simply dedicate 1 more hour to sleep. You'll be surprised over time how much more energy you'll have and how much more recovered you'll feel. Doing this will first allow you to build more muscle and second have more energy to push harder in the gym every day, which will inevitably help you build more muscle over the long run. Now, the last step I suggest to complete if you want to make as much progress as possible in the least amount of time is to truly dive into the world of weightlifting and fitness. It's something I did when I was starting out, which was to absorb as much knowledge as I possibly could on a daily basis to really increase my chances of making progress. I wanted to learn as much as I could, watching every educational piece of content I could possibly find. Learning about the ideal training technique, how to maximize muscle growth, how to maximize your diet, etc. A couple years ago, the two people that I watched the most were Tristan Lee and Greg Doucette, and these were the people that I watched almost every single day. But I know these days, I think Sam Solik is like a big one and a big motivational figure for a lot of young guys. Besides Sam, you'll be able to find many intellectual creators about fitness, nutrition, and so on. Now, to learn in a way that will help you make more progress, you will need to follow a couple steps. Step number 1 is to define channels of education. On every social media platform, you'll be able to find plenty of educational channels. Your job is to define a couple of these channels and start looking through them. A couple ideas I could give you are Jeff Nippard, Jeremy Ether, Renaissance Periodization, Mario Tomic, Eugene Teo, Joe Delaney, Sean Alwanji, Biolane, Eric Helms, me, hopefully. So just choose a couple channels and start looking through them. Step number 2, choose topics that actually interest you. Once you start looking through their channels, you can begin to identify topics that you would be interested in. Don't overthink this too much. Once you see something that you might be interested in, watch that piece of content. The third step is to begin diving deeper in that specific subject. Make use of your curiosity to really learn about something, to really dive deep in that specific subject. Then step number 4, apply that knowledge. Once you know enough about something, you can start to experiment with it in your own life. If you saw 2 or 3 videos about the ideal bench press technique, you can start to apply that knowledge in real life to essentially lock in the knowledge in your head. The ideal way to learn something is to learn something, then apply it, and then repeat the process. Just learning something and never applying it is a sure way to never really remember it or remember it very poorly. So essentially, just apply what you learn as quickly as you can. That way you'll actually remember what you learn a lot better and therefore make exponential progress over time. So the last thing I would suggest you do if you're truly obsessed and care about making the most amount of progress in the least amount of time is truly diving into the world of weightlifting and fitness and absorbing as much knowledge as you possibly can every single day. So in summary, define exactly what you want, then define the variables that truly matter in the achievement of your goal, then define all the things that don't matter and learn how to say no to them, and finally know how to maximize the variables that do matter for maximum progress. That is how you build your ideal physique in the least amount of time. Now, before you leave, I help men build an aesthetic physique, so if you're quite confused about how to get in shape or you need any type of help with building an aesthetic body, I have a personal system called the Aesthetic Physique Method, which should help you with that. There's a link down below. So, that's it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope you learned something. Leave a like, leave a comment. If you want to learn how to get a sense of unlimited motivation for the gym, you can watch this video right here.